we continue with InterPARES project, in this case with a specific project that is about digitization and the possibilities for with AI for digitization. So we'll proceed in the same way with short introductions, and then you have an hour in this case because you are three, okay? So here in the middle, Eng Sengsavang, who is an archivist at UNESCO. Peter Sullivan, already introduced, you know him from the University of British Columbia. And Zeljko Trbusic, who is a professor, a teaching assistant at the Department of Information and Communication Sciences at the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at the University of Zagreb. So the floor is yours.
Thank you, David, and hello, everyone. Is this working? Or, yeah, okay. So our presentation today is about AI-assisted digitization of documentary heritage materials, and we'll be talking about two studies under InterPARES Trust. And so the first study that we're talking about is called Model for AI-Assisted Digitization. And these are the participating researchers. We have a few members of our team here today with us, Zeljko and Hrvoje, and also Marta, she's somewhere in the back. And then Peter, who's doing a related study as well. And then we have researchers from around the world. So the State Archivist of Hawaii, and then also a colleague from the University of South Africa, and then we have some students who are becoming archivists from the University of British Columbia. So this is just a short introduction to the presentation. First, I'll talk a bit about the study overview, and then Zeljko will talk about the digitization model that we're developing and a survey on digitization and AI. And then Peter will talk about the project on UNESCO audio recordings and AI that he mentioned earlier. So, study overview of the study Model for AI-Assisted Digitization. So, our interest is in the process of digitization. I think that everyone in this room knows what digitization is, and a lot of organizations are digitizing their materials, their physical materials in all formats, paper, audio recordings, 16mm films, photographs, and they're converting them to digital form. And this is a very, technical and time-consuming process, but also very important. And so, and many of us in the study team have also been involved ourselves in digitization. So for us, this is also a very practical problem in terms of archives and the digital world that we live in. And also when you add AI into the mix, that brings up also many opportunities, but also many potential challenges. So this is an area that we really believe is very important to study as part of InterPARES. And so the study goals are first to explore how can organizations use AI methods and tools during their digitization projects and processes. And we also want to analyze the potential opportunities and challenges of using AI for digitization, including the potential, well, there's benefits probably, but also what are the biases and shortcomings that we might come across using some models that are either available, as off-the-shelf tools or that are developed by organizations in-house. And then we also want to encourage digitization of our archives and documentary heritage materials for long-term preservation, which I'll talk about very briefly next. But to encourage the production of high-quality and diverse data sets that could also be used to train machine learning. So some of the study outcomes that we're working on are a literature review, of course, and then a model of the phases and activities in a digitization project or program. And we would cross-reference this with existing standards and best practices for digitization and also potential AI interventions. And Zeljko will be talking about that right after me. And then a survey on digitization and AI, which is currently open. And we're receiving responses right now, and they're actually very interesting already. So we're very excited to read the results and to share the results once we analyze them. But mostly, yeah, just it's kind of like a conversation. You know, it's an opportunity to have some feedback from the archival and library and documentary heritage community, and to learn from the experiences and the ideas of everyone. And then we also put that an outcome is sort of, we're co-opting the project with Peter, the audio recordings metadata project. So, and so just to have a baseline understanding for our own study, we came up with this definition of digitization, which is just a compilation of, you know, other people's definitions, and we've just kind of shortened it. So the process of creating a digital image of a physical artifact by scanning or photographing. And in English, we also call it imaging, conversion, or capture. But of course, it's not just that. It's a very, you know, complete process with many other layers to it that are more than just technical. And then just very briefly before I hand it over to Zeljko, just this idea again of digitization for long-term preservation. So, you know, there's digitization for everyday use. Like, you know, if you're at your desk or in your office one day at work and you need to scan a document to be able to send it to a colleague or to, you know, for whatever reason, you're doing a project and you want it scanned. But you're not doing it as thinking about the long-term, keeping it as a long-term record. So we're not interested in that. You know, that could also be interesting, but that's not the purpose of our project. Our project is really to look at when organizations digitize, specifically in order to create a copy, like a viable and authentic copy of a physical record. And so this idea of long-term preservation is really at the base of our study. And so we've taken some definitions from digitization standards, because this is also something that a lot of digitization standards talk about, is that the goal of a certain type of digitization is long-term preservation. And that is because there's this idea, I don't know if you've heard of it, but in English it's called digital surrogate. So basically you're creating a digital copy of something that exists in real life that should be able to stand in for the original. In the case that the original, say, gets lost in a fire, you know, we don't want to think about this, but it's possible, or gets wrecked in a flood, or gets damaged somehow. And so the whole purpose is actually to be able to create a faithful source, sorry, let me just read this. Reproduce the non-digital source record as faithfully as possible so that the digital image can act in place of the non-digital source record, where it is required to act as evidence of business activities. So this brings it into a kind of legal and juridical idea as well. The idea that a digital copy should be able to act as evidence of what it's referring to. And this is from the ISO standard. And then there's several other standards that talk about the same idea, but another one is FADGI, which is an American digitization guideline for the US government employees. And so it's sort of the same idea, faithful reproduction of a historical record held in the public trust. So this is what is very interesting for us, and also we believe very important for society as a whole. And so now I'm going to turn it over to Zeljko. Yes.
Okay, thank you, David, for the introduction. Thank you, Eng, for the introduction to the study. So today I'm going to be speaking on behalf of us on two things. First is our digitization model, and the second one is kind of brief overview of our survey and what we have done so far. So first to start with is the digitization model. So first of all, what's the concept of our model? Like every other model or kind of guideline document, we need to identify main stages and activities in digitization project and represent it in a kind of visual model so everybody could use it easy and so it could be perceived correctly. So, of course, as Mohammed said in the introductory to the InterPARES project, we are trying to devise our own solutions. Of course, there are existing digitization models and procedures that we could use, but we try to devise our own model so we can think about AI while we are doing and building the model, so we can identify as we go potential use cases of AI in digitization. So the model is not prescriptive. Of course, there is no one-size-fits-all approach for every digitization project, but they all share common activities and stages what we have tried to identify. Like Eng said, we are trying to cross-reference everything with various standards and best practices, so with FEDGI and the standards from Library and Archives Canada, Library of Congress, etc. Our main goal is to identify AI fields in the digitization model and maybe create some other tools to help future digitization projects, such as some checklists or decision trees, so that people could use this model easily. So I'm going to show a few pictures we have so far. Of course, this is work in progress, so not everything is finished. We still have, I think, 2 years to go in this project, or something like that. So we are 3 years, yeah. So we're kind of in the middle of things, and we worked on these activities while we are here in Olot. So the first thing is we are trying to do a kind of spreadsheet of all the activities and try to cross-reference them with different digitization stages. So we have identified digitization stages as like a project management stage, which is an overlap of the whole digitization project, and of course pre-digitization, the digitization itself, and post-digitization processing. So all of our activities, which are divided into sub-activities, we're actually trying to check mark them in which stage do they belong. And as you can see, some of them can belong in multiple stages. And of course, we have our AI column, which is currently unoccupied because it was just added as an idea, of course, in this in this stage of our project. And of course, we try to back everything up with literature. So where was the specific activity cited? And so we have a whole model which is based on literature and of course our discussions. So this is kind of visual representation of the model. As you can see, there are many spaces which are still unoccupied, but we are trying to, get this into the most easy way for everybody to understand, but not to, of course, miss anything. And we devised it like this, so because many things are overlapping and some things are specific to various digitization stages. So this is kind of very useful for us to have a visual representation like this. And the third visual representation is just a collection of a list of activities that belong to various stages. So we have project planning, and we have set up. We have made some stages that we connected to the project planning, like documentation, like selection, like digitization policy, budget management, timeline and decisions, which are on a larger scale of digitization project. We also have pre-digitization, which is of course the physical preparation of materials, collection of metadata, which is existing, devising workflows, etc. Then we have the digitization or conversion into digital form itself. Here we have technical specification of various equipment that is used, the file versions, the file formats that are using, the naming of files, which will happen after the digitized files are produced. There's of course quality control and testing of the digitization itself, and post-digitization, which requires a lot of work. So there's a possibility to add more metadata than the metadata identified in pre-digitization. Of course, we need to think about backups, delivery of files to our customers, the access to digital files in our system. So there's many activities overall we need to think about. I hope we have covered everything or most of things, but this model will probably be not perfect, but perfect enough to identify, to incorporate AI into our world. Okay, so I'm going to briefly speak on survey also. So Eng said a few things about our survey on digitization. So what we want to do with our survey, we want to understand the current state of digitization within organizations, because that's important. And of course, understand if they are using AI in some way during their digitization projects. We need to understand what are the barriers and drivers in both digitization and AI. So what are the challenges? What do you have problems with? And what do you want to do with digitization and AI so you can make your procedures faster and you can deliver materials and preserve them in a better way. And so far we have over 100 responses. Hopefully we'll get this at least to 200, I hope. So the deadline is, we still have some time. So of course I invite you all to fill out the survey. I hope you have received it through some channel or some listserv. So this is really important to us to collect the data from the professionals in the field. So I'll just go quickly on the sections of our survey. So first of all, of course, we have background information of the respondents, from which country you are, what type of organization you work in, what sector, what's your role, how many years you have worked, and what's the size. Then we have section 2, which is our questions about digitization activities. So in which formats you digitize, what's your criteria for selection, for example, what quantity of digitized materials you have, and things like this. So digitization questions. Section 3 is the context. So the organizational digitization policy, some legal or regulatory requirements in your country, what's your funding, what's your motivation for digitization, what are some barriers and risks and challenges? Do you have some IT staff involved in-house or external vendors? And what are your successes so far and what you have learned? That's all important to us. Of course, section 4 deals with AI. So we pose questions, for example, have you used AI during digitization? What methods or tools regarding AI have you used? Have you used some off-the-shelf tools, for example, something from Microsoft or Google or ChatGPT? What are the motivators and barriers for you using AI? And where do you see the potential benefits in the digitization activities. Before I pass on to Peter, Eng would just like to say a couple words on the results of the survey we have so far.
Okay, so just 1 minute on what we, some of the interesting responses that we've received so far from a very unscientific pattern recognition exercise. It seems like about, so far, maybe 10% of organizations that have responded have said yes, that they have used AI in their digitization projects. And it seems like, and this is already quite interesting, but the ones that said yes, a lot of them seem to use off-the-shelf AI tools, which makes sense because, you know, they're just readily available, and it's that much more difficult to develop your own in-house AI model. For example, somebody said that they used Transcribus, and then they talked a bit about some of the challenges. They said that there were some inaccuracies in the transcription, but that overall it facilitated searching for like research. And then in terms of challenges, a lot of people mentioned funding, which is not surprising. Somebody mentioned lack of support from higher management. And then there's some more technical challenges like management of complex digitization workflows and multiple vendors, and multiple vendors for different formats. And also ongoing storage costs after the digital files have been produced, because, you know, once they're produced, you have to find storage for them. You have to keep paying for systems to manage the digital files, and some digital preservation infrastructure challenges. So these are sort of what we have experienced ourselves as well. So, but it's interesting to hear that, you know, this seems to be kind of a general pattern across organizations so far. And then for greatest successes, people said the fact that we managed to digitize it's in itself and like finish a project is in itself a success. And then a lot of people talk about being proud that it increases access and, you know, access to the public, and also transparency and accountability for government. And also that it helps to preserve archives. So, yeah, there you go. And now I turn it over to Peter.
Thanks, Eng. Thanks, David, and thanks, Zeljko. Let's see. So, where the REO3 digitization project is really trying to set a broad landscape for what digitization looks like and what it could look like with AI solutions, the UNESCO Radio Archives project is a sort of deep cut at a post-digitization case study. So this is work being done by myself and Eng. And so what drives this project is this idea that archives often place great emphasis on the preservation of material, but sometimes there is lack of support in the access to the materials, which may undermine their value to us as a society. So if you're digitizing tons of materials and then just leaving them on a server somewhere, those may be useful far in the future, but they could also be really beneficial now if we have ways to improve access to them. In the UNESCO archive, there is a current process that's being done to enrich the metadata to the audio files. And this involves an intern listening to the radio recordings and looking for certain particular aspects of it. So for instance, identifying the personalities involved, what topic is the recording about, what language is it in, and it's problematic because it's very time consuming and there may be actually major barriers that the intern may not be able to overcome. So if they don't speak the language or even recognize what language a recording is in, they have no way to describe that recording. So our driving question behind this study is thinking about how AI can enable better description of archival audio. And with that in mind, I'd like to talk about the complexities of the UNESCO Radio Archive and what makes it such a challenge for a post-digitization metadata enrichment project. So starting off, we have about 6,000 recordings that have been digitized and placed on a platform that anyone can go listen to, and the interns are currently using to listen and describe the recordings. The recordings themselves may lack a substantial amount of information due to many complexities, but of the recordings that are there, only about 800 have been human described at this point. So it would take a tremendous amount of time to expand that to the full amount that have been digitized so far. So about 40 years if you have one intern doing about 800 every two years. It's a very heterogeneous archive. So there are the 5 current main UNESCO areas of focus, as well as UNESCO history. And each of these types of recordings may be very different from other recordings on the in the archive. So the style and genre of the recordings really vary, and so thinking about how a model might be able to work well, an AI model might be able to work well on certain types of recordings. For instance, a educational program, and where there's a clear structure to who's talking when, and then compare that to a meeting where there may be cross chatter, lots of people talking, heated debate. These are 2 very different types of recordings that present very different challenges to AI models. Crosstalk, for instance, is not a solved problem for automatic speech recognition. No matter how good Siri or Alexa are at hearing your voice commands, if there's a bunch of people talking at once and you want all of that information to be captured, it's an unsolved problem as of yet. There are many, many languages represented in this archive, so about 70 total languages, most of them French, quite a few English, but then also quite a few that have been listed as multilingual, which means there'll be different languages on a single recording without actually necessarily the information of what those languages are. And from a perspective of applying models, you need to have a particular language model to work on a given recording. So if you don't know what language it is, it's very challenging to actually figure out what model to even work with. The archives cover a long period of time, basically the lifespan of the UNESCO radio unit, which may lead to interesting changes in language over that period. Describing that, I want to emphasize our goal is really to, on the archival side, understand the relationship between the digital surrogate and the original record, and to also think about how diplomatic analysis might be applied to audio recordings as opposed to simply textual documents. So can we use diplomatics as a way to pull out useful information to help this metadata enrichment process? And then we have similar AI goals to the broader digitization process in terms of evaluating the benefits and risk of these AI tools. There's 4 different models we're looking at. Spoken language identification, aiding the ability of archivists to know even what language is on the recording in cases where the metadata doesn't say. Transcription, which we anticipate may save time in the description effort. If you're able to produce a full transcript with time steps, the intern can quickly look through and describe what the recording is about. Translation as a way to gain access to recordings that are not in either English or French, the 2 languages that are most commonly spoken by the interns working on the project. And then summarization as a way to take the audio document and put it into 1 or 2 sentences that can be used to tell users what the recording is about. And that is basically our overview of the UNESCO project. Thank you very much.
So thank you, Peter, Zeljko, and Eng. Please stay. Okay. And for the presentation of this digitization model, I don't know if you are aware that there is a big expectation because we are digitizing the whole country since many years. There is a lot to do, and having this clear idea of the activities involved and how AI can contribute on this will be really good for us. A couple of questions. You just said that the debate will be at the end of the session, but we have 2 questions. One is, will the digitization model apply to any kind of organization despite mandate or size?
So, if I understood the question, can this model be applied to any organization? Yeah, so our focus is on long-term preservation. So if the organization is preserving this digital data for a long term, that's the only thing that's of interest to this model. So we are not making a model for digitized files for publication on online repositories or for your users. We are focusing on long-term preservation. So if your institution is doing long-term preservation of digitized documents and archival documents, this could be applied, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to add something, but I've forgotten. So okay.
Well, the next question is for you, related to this. Maria says, that's from the online. Huh? When Eng says digitization for long-term preservation, does she refer to the long-term preservation of the digital surrogates? Because the long-term preservation of original records is not reached with digitization. This is a statement.
It's
no?
not rich
with
yes.
digitization.
Yes, thanks for the question. Yes, when we say digital long-term preservation, we mean of the digital surrogate, and I think we're taking the Digital Preservation Coalition definition of long-term as keeping a digital file for as long as necessary. So, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean forever, but it means over a long period to enable access to that. And yes, so there's also preservation of the original, and sometimes a lot of organizations want to digitize in order to help preserve the original so that there's less handling, there's less need to take out the file or to play it if it's you know, like a videotape that's very fragile, etc. So yeah, but when we say preservation, long-term preservation, we do specifically refer to the digital file.
Okay, so thank you very much.
Thank you.